to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
Asher used to like Jeeps a lot, and then he kind of moved away from it. But I now think because of you and Tristan, he's like, man, I'd like a Jeep.
I kind of need to get a Jeep now.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of like looking for other Jeeps.
Yeah.
There might be a situation coming up. My boys aren't going to listen to this podcast, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Where I'm going to need another vehicle soon.
I don't know that Cammy listens.
Probably not. Be another Jeep. And what I've noticed, I'm going to look for a 4-door Jeep. That's because I think that'd be a necessity for us. So anyways, but what I've noticed is you can get like older 2-door Jeeps in pretty good shape for like $6,000 to $9,000.
Wow, that's cool.
So like you can get an affordable Jeep that would be a great car for a kid.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And a good car to show off as well. Somewhere like in
fun.
San Angelo, go outside of town and drive around with your buddies.
Mine is like not a good Jeep. You know what I mean? It's not nice, but like it's like you put it's got a 2.5-inch lift. You put some bigger tires on it. And it's a Jeep. And so it's like, it doesn't matter if it's not the nice Jeep. Everybody's like, that looks like fun.
Yeah.
That's Jeep.
I think that's an automatic response. Like when we saw you guys back at the
football
YMCA football game, you know, and you rolled up in your Jeep and you're honking and like, it's like, this is
Looks
cool,
fun,
you know?
Yeah.
I think part of it for me though, too, is because you're my friend and you were really excited about it. And so
that's my friend.
Yeah. You know, like there's some excitement to be able to, like, you know.
There's nothing comfortable about them. Like they're so rugged, you know, you feel every bump. And as far as I understand, I've never driven like a new one, but as far as I understand, even the new ones are like pretty rough.
So if you get a Jeep, you also need to have a budget for a chiropractor.
That's right. I remember working at Chevy, the very first one I cleaned. I didn't know how like, I don't know what the proper word would be here, but the term I want to use is like analog, like how you can like everything can come apart. There's different like there's got to be a specific term for it, but I can't think of it right now. And so I went at Eli and I was like, how the crap do I open up this trunk or this hood? And he was like, well, there's these clicks right here, and I had like
2 on the side and then in the middle. I actually installed a hood lock on my Jeep.
Nice.
Because I was trying to figure out like how do you keep people from stealing a Jeep like mine? That's super old school. Top's gonna be off. You can just get in the car. How do you keep you from hot wiring it? So I installed this contraption on my battery where you have to have a clicker and it turns the battery on and off.
Oh,
and
nice.
then I have a hood lock so people can't get in and take that thing off.
Yeah. Huh. You should buy those old school 90s contraptions that go over the
club.
The club.
Is that what they're called?
Dude, I remember those infomercials. The club.
I remember thinking like, well, you got to have that when you get a car.
Yep.
Dude, when I was young too, I thought the biggest commitment ever was being a pizza delivery driver. Because you had to install that thing on top of your car and you have it there forever. So in my mind, I was like, I can't do that. I don't want that on my car. I'm not going to work there forever. I can't have it on my car forever.
I saw a meme the other day where somebody said, like, how did pizza delivery drivers get to your house before GPS? Like,
dude, right? Just memorizing.
Did people really ask that question?
Yeah.
That's a dumb question.
Yeah. I mean, we had maps.
Legit. I mean, like, so is it?
How did you call people before cell phones?
Well, no, okay. I understand, like, yes, there's maps, but like, I also think about the whole like 30 minutes or less, and I think like, I have to find something on a map. Like, so walk me through.
That's you as a millennial,
not knowing. I want to know.
People survived for hundreds and hundreds of years before GPS.
Well, I know that, but just like explain, like, if I'm a pizza delivery guy, I don't know where your house is.
No, that's what I'm saying. Culturally, you've only grown up relying on a GPS.
I know.
Before that, you actually learned the streets.
You just memorized every street.
Yeah, I could drive around town without a GPS.
Yeah.
Because they didn't actually have GPS till I was like in college or after. Like they had TomToms
and those were not always
well, and also
great.
so
you have to learn where you're going. And if you don't know where it is, literally you can pull out a map, look at it and go, oh, it's over by this, and you know how to get there.
And the other thing was a lot of those pizza places back then would have a huge city map of their delivery area in the store.
Yep.
So that they could go, okay, here I am,
mark
and
that.
I can go there. And then you
and also,
now it may be a little less efficient because you might turn a block too early and have to circle back around, but you're getting there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I remember because I didn't have a GPS in my car or my phone until early 20s, but I remember if I didn't know where somebody lived, it was a lot of relative location things of like, go to this gas station and then just kind of look around and then you'll find my street next to that. So I guess that's definitely the case too.
I actually had a map.
I just think of like the panic attack of like, I got to get this there now. So,
gotcha. Well, I think they also, typically back then they had, like, you didn't have a pizza place that delivered to the entire city. Like, you had a smaller area.
That kind of, it was their district of the town.
Like, think about it like another job. Like, you probably learned it pretty quick. When you were delivering oil field supplies, you probably learned, it probably took you a while to learn where all the locations were, but once you learned it, you're good. So your pizza delivery area probably didn't take that long for you to learn
That's
the area.
true.
Well, I was going to say that ours was different because like you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles. Right. But like, you start learning the main highways, you know? And so they would say, hey, you're going to take this highway and
turn here.
And it got to a point, like the maps were literally 3x5 index cards. And it would show, it wouldn't even show where we start. It would just show a junction on a highway. So, you know, I got to get to that junction. And then from that junction, it would show you where to go to the location.
Okay.
So you're like, okay, well, the map would start an hour and a half away from the shop. And you'd be like, I know how to get to that highway now.
Yeah.
But when I was 18 and they first put me on the insurance, I had no idea how to get to that highway.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, the closest I ever came to that was printing out MapQuest. Like we would have we've had 10 pages of map.
That.
And then you miss an exit and you're like, well, I'm going to be on this a while.
Go through your pages.
Go back to the exit and then get up. And then you're trying to flip through and you're like, well, we got to be here. I don't know.
I know.
You just have to restart. Let's just drive back to St. Angela and start over.
Back to the beginning.
Oh man. Well, hey everybody, let's step on over to the PCC. Come on over here. Millennials, Gen X, everybody. You know, we want everybody over here. Like Gen Z, what's up? Gen Alpha even. I wonder if we have any super young listeners. That wouldn't be super young, actually. That'd be like...
And the baby boomers. Don't forget about the baby boomers.
Oh, it's true. Thank you for using your technology today, baby boomers. Just kidding. Welcome,
we've just been playing on their iPhone constantly because they don't know how to stop it.
Exactly. Yeah. Just on a loop nonstop. Oh, man. So my culture corner today, I just kind of want to throw out there that I think this is interesting. And I think, Micah, you probably will have more cohesive thoughts on it. But Ryan got banned from TikTok after having
36 hours.
After having it for 36 hours.
My art TikTok is still up.
Still fine.
I started a Christian one because when I started the art TikTok, I started following a lot of other pastors and I started following a lot of just Christian people and enjoyed theirs. And I thought, I want to jump in on this.
Yeah.
So I started it and I posted an introductory video and then a really short kind of catch your attention video. And the second video, like it was 2 minutes long, within 12 hours had something like 700.
What was it?
I talked about how when the law came, 3,000 people died. And when the Spirit came, 3,000 people were saved.
I think I know why you were banned.
Because I talked about death?
I think that's it because now that's really interesting. I bet that plus the Christian thing is like the multiple violations. I bet that's it. But I've seen a lot of people replace the word die with unalive. They would say, there was a guy talking about his sibling that committed suicide. And what he said,
he unalived himself.
He unalived himself
okay,
is what they've said. Yeah, and if you ever say sex or spell out sex, they put SEGGS instead of SEX because it's immediately a red flag to the thing if you're talking about sex or death.
The bot booted me because I said 3,000 people died.
And I bet that plus Christianity and like...
That was actually misinformation.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was on there for 36 hours. Yeah. But that video, two minutes long, had like 700 views in the first 12 hours.
And received well, too. Like I didn't see any negative comments or anything.
In a day and a half, I had more interaction on my preacher one than I did in a month on my art one. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I went to log in yesterday, and it had logged me out. And so I went to log back in, and it says, you are permanently banned. Or not yesterday, but yeah.
Yeah, it's so brutal, man. Like, what? Not even like hey, this happened. Do you want to explain yourself?
But and for multiple violations.
Exactly.
I'm sitting here going, what? So apparently I can't talk. So Jesus was unalived on the cross.
That's right. And then realized.
It's so dumb. It's so dumb. So what I told you need to do is just post everything to Rumble.
Yeah.
No, because you won't get none of that'll happen.
What I have done is I've revived my my YouTube channel that I had kind of left dormant.
They'll do the same thing on YouTube.
Will they?
I mean, it's a little less stringent, but like that stuff will start happening. I mean, all these people keep getting kicked off YouTube now. Russell Brand just got kicked off YouTube.
Yeah.
Recently. So yeah, there's.
Well, for now, you can just I have a lot of videos.
I mean, my thought is like just post it to as many of your accounts as you can, and if you get banned, you get banned. You won't get banned on Rumble.
Yeah.
Is a Rumble like let's get ready to rumble?
Let's get ready to
Rumble is the YouTube, like it's just like YouTube.
I just keep hearing Rubble, and I want to make sure it's
Rumble. Yeah, like let's get ready to rumble.
I keep hearing like Barney Rubble, and I was like, I know that's not right. I want to double check. Rumble, sweet. We promoted them now.
I need to switch over. We need to do a Rumble channel.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Sweet.
And hopefully early next year, like I've been working on some papers and I'm creating some video content and stuff. And soon you should be able to find all that on our website through the church too.
Yeah. So we
might ban you from there though.
I get banned from the church site.
That's right.
You said bad.
I am banned from
managing
with the church
anything technology
since I deleted it years ago.
So yeah, that I mean, I think there's a lot to be said.
Again, I was intentionally trying to delete my ministry page. I just forgot.
Want it for the record.
I just forgot that the church page was piggybacked on that. And
the church site was on the same server.
Yeah.
You deleted your server.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Including our church website.
And 4 years of sermons.
Yeah.
I have had people through the years go, man, you got to re-preach Joe because I can't listen to those sermons anymore. And I was like,
sorry.
We'll
get there eventually. We'll see how long you guys can stay with us.
Yeah, true. True. I think that there's a lot to be culturally commentated on things like censorship and stuff like that. But that's a whole nother can of worms, I think, to open.
Yeah.
For sure. But don't go see Ryan on TikTok.
No. Go see my art page.
You have your art page and you have
Converse and
I
Canvas.
can't even say that. You guys know how I feel about TikTok.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in helping the Chinese Communist Party.
There we go. Yeah.
Bring whatever's coming when they bring war on the U.S.
Red Dawn.
The CCP. I didn't know when you texted about that. I had no idea what that meant. And I was sitting on the toilet again and I was like, CCP. And I was going through and I was like, Christian censorship.
Oh, man.
But go subscribe on YouTube. Check out Rumble as well. I'm curious about looking more into that site and stuff like that. So we'll probably I
think this is going to be all this stuff is good for Rumble.
Yeah.
Because these people that are getting kicked off are going to start moving over there. And
yeah. So yeah, we'll probably start doing simpler over there, sermons over there. That way we can build
a collection,
build the library over there as well. So that way, if we are censored on other places, we got it over there for sure. Dope. What are we talking about today, Ryan?
Today, Pierce, we are going to talk about the all too fun topic of adultery, and we're going to talk a little bit about the biblical implications of it and why it is so offensive.
But Ryan, is adultery really as offensive as it used to be? It seems so commonplace now. It seems like 50% of megachurch pastors have adultery as one of their requirements.
Wow. Okay. Well, actually, Pierce.
Straighten that one out, Ryan.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. Adultery is very common, and it kind of depends. I think it does depend on your standard. Like, what we would say about adultery is obviously going to be different what somebody in the world might say about adultery versus what even maybe like Billy Graham and a lot of his followers would say about adultery. And so there's, I think, a lot of different standards for adultery. My dad once said, when my mom confronted him and said, "Are you having an affair with this woman?" He was like, No, we just make out and touch a little bit. And so like to him, it wasn't adultery because they just made out a little bit, and so like there's lots of different standards.
Yeah.
Some of you are going, wait a minute, did your dad really say that? You could ask him, but he's dead. So it's one of those things that like, I do think that there are different measures. We have a lot of Christian people who will say they'll cite Matthew 5 to look at a woman with lust is to commit adultery in your heart. And I don't think that Matthew 5 should be our standard for adultery, for measuring what adultery is, partly because in Matthew 5, Jesus is addressing the Jews. He is addressing, he's just said, sorry, that's Matthew 6, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's Matthew 6.
Yep.
So in Matthew 5, he has set up and he said that the Pharisees, unless your righteousness is greater than the Pharisees, you'll never see the kingdom of heaven. The Pharisees aren't righteous. And then in chapter 6, he goes through several points of the law. One of the points of the law is you've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. And remember that the Pharisees at this time are holding themselves up as beacons of righteousness because they're saying, look, we fulfilled all the law. And what Jesus is doing is systematically showing how they're law breakers.
Yeah.
And so if you've looked at a woman with
that was 5.
Is it 5?
Yeah.
Okay. 6 is tithing, 6 is fasting.
It's 5:28.
And 6 is something else. Offerings.
Lay up for yourself treasures.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Heaven,
so thank you for checking that. So he says to them, like, he's addressing the law with them. And the Pharisees believe that because they've held to the letter of the law, that they're righteous. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus is showing that the issue here isn't the letter of the law. The issue here is their heart. And what he's really doing is condemning the Pharisees. And he's really saying your righteousness, because you're holding to the letter of the law, the Pharisees believe themselves to be righteous. And he goes, you're not holding to the letter of the law. You're not holding to the heart of the law. Therefore, you're guilty. And then in chapter 6, and especially chapter 7, Jesus offers himself up as the means by which righteousness comes and says, that it can't be through the law. So if you want to use the standard of Matthew 5 as this is my standard for adultery, please just recognize that the reason that Jesus is bringing that up is to show the unrighteousness of the Pharisees. And so
I'm wondering, I'm just throwing this out. So brand new thought. I'm wondering if we should use a different term now, a different phrase. Cause I'm thinking like thinking through it. Adultery.
A different phrase instead of adultery?
Yeah, because adultery, if I'm thinking about this right, tell me if I'm missing anything. Adultery was a concept from the law. So like for example, I'm thinking back a little bit to a few things. One, pre-law, Abraham lies about Sarah being his wife. Right. And there seems to be some kind of like subtle implication that she actually not necessarily have sex with, but marries or is somehow connected with in a relationship with.
Yeah. So the king there, his name starts with an A, but Abimelech. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Old Abby.
He is kept from having sex with her for a couple of reasons.
Yes. Yeah. But what I'm saying is like that point being that wasn't the thought. Abraham's thought wasn't like, oh, Sarah's going to commit adultery. If he wasn't thinking God's going to keep her from having sex with him, he was thinking, I'm trying to protect myself.
Yeah.
Another example.
The story really quickly is that Abraham is living in a foreign land. He doesn't have a home really at this point. His wife is beautiful, and he is fearful that the king, is going to put him to death to steal his wife. So he just says, well, she's just my sister. That way he can be treated favorably by the king. So the king takes her as his wife.
Right, but doesn't sleep with her.
God prevents that.
But my point is like the concept in Abraham's mind wasn't, I can't do this because of adultery. So then post-law, there is quite a bit of what we would call polygamy.
Yes.
And none of that was called adultery. You know what I'm saying? So there was some kind of like cultural nuance in how they viewed the law. So, and I think we'll get there in a second. The reason I'm thinking we might need to change the word is because I think Matthew 5 is actually referencing the law.
Yes.
What Jesus is saying is your perspective of righteousness that you gain through obedience to the law is at this certain point. Right. And what I'm actually telling you is that if you want to uphold the law in the way that it says, it's way higher than you think it is.
Way higher.
Right. So he wasn't making a commentary on whether adultery was okay or not. Obviously, he's not saying that's okay.
100%.
But his point wasn't don't commit adultery. His point was if you want to gain righteousness through obedience to the law, you have to do more than you think you actually do. So he's saying those of you who think you're blameless because you've never actually slept with another woman, you actually have committed adultery according to the law. So that's what I'm saying. I wonder
if law language,
because where we're going to go in a second is the gospel and how that misrepresents the gospel. And so I'm wondering, just as a precursor to that conversation, if we use the term adultery, the tendency is going to be to go straight back to the law.
Agreed.
So I'm just a brand new thought.
Well, I think it's a great thought. It's interesting because you're right. The law hasn't been introduced with Abraham yet, but when Abimelech gives Sarah back, because none of the women have gotten pregnant in his kingdom, and God has closed all their wombs as judgment for him having this wife, Sarah, right? Which is super interesting because, like, I don't know how long it would take for a nation of people. At this point, it's honestly probably a city of people. But how long does it take for your city to have no pregnancies before you realize something's going on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not overnight.
Yeah. So some months, probably, minimum, some months. And when he gives her back to Abraham, he says, look, you've done me wrong, by not telling me this was your wife. And he gives her money. He gives Abraham and Sarah money for the purpose of buying a veil so that this thing won't happen again, because the king recognizes that even this is offensive.
Right.
Like, he recognizes something is off with this,
Yep.
And so that is pre-law, but there's still this indication
concept that
something is off.
Absolutely. So we could say that, like, across the board from the beginning of marriage, when God puts Adam and Eve together in Genesis 2, there's been a concept of these two become one flesh, and it's not okay to move outside of that.
Yep. But
I think all I'm saying is, like, I think the phrase adultery, the word adultery, seems to be just tied to the law. I'm trying to think of how that could be off. It might be off, but
God uses it all the time. This might not be different. Yeah, but he uses it all the time to talk about how his people
are adultery.
Yeah.
Adulterous. Yeah. So anyways, that might have derailed the conversation. Anyways,
no, I don't think it has at all. Because I think it's it's still something we need to consider.
Yeah.
The point you're making is an excellent point, that in Matthew, Jesus isn't giving commentary, and let's just broaden it out. Jesus isn't giving commentary on murder or adultery or tithing or fasting or prayer. Jesus is giving commentary on, if you want righteousness according to the law, here's the impossible standard.
Yeah.
And so it's a discussion about righteousness that Jesus is having in Matthew 5, 6, and 7.
Because my initial thought, the reason this came to mind, I think, is because I hear people talk about Matthew 5, and if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Mm-hmm. I've even heard like men's conferences where people preach this and say you've got to stop lusting, which, okay, fine. But what we talked about, I don't know how many episodes ago, like, the goal isn't to avoid the lust.
Right.
The goal is to have a correct perspective of Jesus being glorified in your life, and then watch lust go away. But then what happens is, if we abide by the Matthew 25 concept in terms of like saying that for us is a rule or a law we have to follow, that every time you look at a woman and you go, then you feel this like tainted nature because you've just committed adultery. Like, that's how it's conveyed.
That's how it feels.
Because
not that you have, in fact.
No, but that's what, if we're teaching Matthew 5 from that perspective and tying it to the word adultery, that's so. What I'm I guess maybe proposing is maybe having extramarital relationships. Relations, that's a fun word.
Yeah.
Having sex outside of the marriage relationship you have is a much bigger deal, is what I'm saying, than just breaking a law.
Right. Yeah. So let's get into that. Right. So there are only a few things, maybe minimalizing it, but there are a handful of things that I think the three of us would say, I can't foresee me ever changing my opinion on this.
Yeah.
Always in that, of course, is at the core is who Christ is, what the cross accomplished, the resurrection of Jesus, everything to do with salvation by faith, the return of Christ. Like, those things for us, no one's going to change our mind on
Dr. Pepper.
ever. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. The 23 flavors, the Waco special or whatever it was called. So all of those things are things for us that I think are bedrock of who we are in Christ. I'm going out on a limb here, but I would argue that the three of us feel the same way about the intent of marriage. That Genesis 1, the intent of marriage, when God created Adam and Eve, male and female, and this is Genesis 1, 26 through 28, and he said, let us make mankind in our own image, in our own likeness, let us make them. So he made them in his image, male and female, who created them. And then the very first command he gives them is to subdue the earth and fill it. And we've talked about this, I think, in passing before on the podcast, that while there is in that fill the earth, while there is a command for progeny, for creating children, a bigger part of that is, I've just endowed you with my image, now fill the earth with my image, which we see in Isaiah 6, when Isaiah sees the seraphim flying around the throne of God, and they're saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Habakkuk 2:14, the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. Like, there is this idea that the church, the people of God, are our intent is to bear the image of God into this world and to multiply this image of God. And so marriage is temporary, either ended by the death of one of the two partners in marriage, or it is brought to an end by the return of Christ. Matthew 22, in heaven you're neither married nor given in marriage. But God uses marriage to talk about the language, or he uses that language to talk about the relationship in the Old Testament he has with Israel, and in the New Testament, the relationship that the church has with Christ. And so Christ is the husband, the church is the bride. And so the marriage supper of the Lamb, the church being joined with Christ forever and ever in eternity, like marriage foreshadows and foretells that story.
Yeah.
And so the reason that adultery is so, because as I alluded to a minute ago, and you're right, Micah, this is all post-law, so he might just be using the language there because it's language they comprehended according to the law. It also may be that the law was developed from the view of marriage that he instituted in his people, but we don't know, right? Like, I mean, it makes more sense that it's from the law, that the language flows from the law.
Yeah, we could at least say that. I mean, I think there's things in the law that obviously are reflective of God
his
holistically.
character.
It would seem weird to like start parsing that and say,
No,
well, this part comes from.
Regardless, the adultery language of the law is language that the people of Israel are familiar with.
Yeah. Well, I think we could say this. The law is intention, which he says over and over again, to the people of Israel, so they would be holy as he is holy.
Right.
What we know from Romans is that they were incapable of upholding it.
Right.
So there was an essence of the law as well that was to show the people that they are incapable of earning righteousness on their own, which we would all agree, I think, that according to the scriptures, if there was someone who had upheld the law, there was one. If someone upheld the entire law, they would actually be declared righteous.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's
Ezekiel 18.
Right. So I think that regardless of where those laws originated, like in terms of why that law was in there, the fact that it's in there is the point. So I don't think what I think matters is that the examples you're giving were post-law. I think that's the point, is that God gave this standard they couldn't uphold, but were meant to. They would uphold it so they would look different than the rest of the world. The world would know they were God's people. But those were laws given to them for their holiness, not because having sex with someone that you're not married to wasn't okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's a very small perspective of
the thing point. Agreed. So in Jeremiah, over and over again, especially in chapter 3, we see it a lot there in chapter 3, at least a few times in chapter 3. We also see it in Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23, that when Israel departed from God, and they did this in a couple of ways, they primarily, what's on the table in the prophets is that they are turning away from God to other gods. He says, you're like an adulterous wife. Right. He compares them to an adulterous wife. And the language in Ezekiel is very vulgar. And it is. He says she opened her feet or she spread her legs to all these other gods.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, it's like,
just to like make that intense so people catch that. I think that the translations in English are pretty weak.
Yeah.
Because he says, I will spread your legs so the nations can see your, I forget how it's worded in most translations.
He says, I'll raise your skirt so the nations can see your nakedness. But there he says, she opened her legs or spread her legs to all her lovers.
Those people. Yeah. So I think there's an essence where God's saying, I'm going to lift your skirt so that the world can see, to just be vulgar for a moment in modern terms, so the world can see your looseness. Like that's what he's saying is like, it's not just showing your naked, not for people to go, oh, she's naked, but for them to see that they've been doing it with a bunch of other gods, if you will.
And he points out that, and you have no shame about it.
Right.
There's no shame.
Who does he say? You even pay your lovers for
He goes, most whores get paid for their service, and he goes, and you pay your other lovers. And so then he goes on to say in Ezekiel 16, he says, you should have desired me. And so this is sexual language. This is intimate language. In 1 Corinthians 6, Paul is addressing from 1 Corinthians 5 a husband and a son who have shared a wife, and he's addressing sexual immorality. And he says, do you not know that we belong to Christ, and we can't take the members of Christ and give them to a prostitute? If you lie with a prostitute, you've become one with her. In the same way, if you join yourself with Christ, you've become one in spirit with him. And he says right in between those two statements about the whore and Jesus, he says, for the two will become one flesh. So he quotes Genesis too, right? Like that this is what, so there's all this intimate kind of language. God saying in Ezekiel 16, you've spread your legs to all your lovers. You should have desired me. He's using marriage and sexual kind of language. So the problem with adultery, marriage is, and I'm talking, marriage was created by God to multiply his image in the earth. Now, I recognize that people who have nothing to do with Jesus aren't going to follow my train of thought on this. But for those who proclaim Christ, we have to recognize that our marriages, it's not that our marriages have the opportunity to represent God. Our marriages absolutely represent God, and they're doing a piss poor job of it, or they're doing really well. Like your marriage is correctly representing Jesus, or it is doing a terrible job of representing Jesus, but you're still representing Jesus.
You mean from Ephesians 5 representing Jesus?
Yeah.
Did you already talk about that?
No.
I think that's important if you're going to make that statement.
Yeah. So Ephesians 5 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Talks about honoring your wife's body as you do your own. And wives should submit to their husbands. And then all of this, he wraps up and he says, this is a profound mystery. He says, but I'm actually talking about Christ and the church. So the language there, this counsel that we use in all of our weddings, which is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with it,
right?
Because Paul is trying to frame how a man and a wife would view marriage. He's saying your marriage really is a representation of Jesus. And so a husband who doesn't love his wife well is like, the job of the husband is to show the wife, let me say it differently. The husband represents Christ. And the love that the husband shares for the wife is supposed to be analogous to the love Christ has for the church. And the wife represents the church. And the desire and the affection that the wife has for the husband is supposed to be analogous to the desire the church has for the return of Christ and for his coming. And so those are the roles that we have been entrusted with as a believing spouse, believing couple, right? And when we engage in any behavior that you want to put under the umbrella of infidelity, or any behavior I'll say it this way. I'll use the language that God uses in Ezekiel 16. You've desired something else.
Yeah.
And when my desire for something other than my wife, Michelle, enters into the relationship, it disrupts and dishonors the picture of the gospel.
Yep.
And that's why it should be so bothersome to us. We were talking a little bit before this, Micah, that we are deeply offended when we hear of another pastor's infidelity. But we don't have that same offense when our buddy from church does it. It breaks our hearts a little bit or whatever. But in both cases, the gospel of Christ has been undermined.
Yes.
Yep.
So I don't want to say that the gospel of Christ has been destroyed, because the gospel is more powerful than that.
Yeah, for sure.
But the gospel, we're representatives of the gospel.
Yeah.
I think that's in my opinion, the reason that, to answer your But Ryan question, the reason that adultery seems to be more commonplace, or at least maybe more made light of now, it probably is more commonplace, is because most of the Christians we come in contact with, that you and I have done counseling with, marriage counseling with, have not gone about their marriage thinking about it from the perspective of how are we representing this relationship between Jesus and the church.
Yeah.
They've gone about it looking for happiness. They've gone about it looking for self-satisfaction. And in reality, every relationship, even non-marriage relationships, friendships, there will be points in those relationships where you will feel dissatisfied, unhappy, tension. And so in a marriage, it's because there is so much intimacy that happens through that relationship, the physical relationship. There's something that is probably even spiritual that is like joined together. I don't know what there's something beyond I
agree with that. Yeah.
There's something more intense. So when that happens, husband and wife together,
the one flesh. There is no other relationship like that carries that kind of weight to it. Yeah.
So now the husband and wife, that those feelings of like dissatisfaction or frustration are amplified because of the intimacy.
Yeah.
And so then what they typically do is they've heard their premarital counseling pastor say, well, you just need to learn how to fight. So they try to fight well, and then they go through years and years of this, and then one of them's finally like, I'm done, I'm going to find happiness somewhere else. And that entire time, what they haven't been thinking of is, how does my relationship with my wife or my husband represent the relationship between Jesus and the church? In my opinion, strong opinion, that's why you see so much adultery. These pastors that, which, it's not a ton of them. I get it. It's not the majority of pastors.
No, it's just the ones that make the news.
It is. But these pastors, what it is they are trying to find their their satisfaction in something other than God. And that translates to how they act in their marriage relationship, or specifically outside of their marriage relationship. So I think, to your point, if the gospel is the goal, then extramarital relationships are you will feel the offense, not because you've done something wrong in terms of obeying the law,
right,
but because you are misrepresenting this picture of Jesus and his relationship with the church. You're misrepresenting the gospel, and that should be the offense for us.
I think those who have genuinely put their faith in Christ are offended, rightly so, when somebody comes up and says, well, yeah, but isn't Jesus just one of the ways to get to heaven? Like, Jesus is just your way to get to heaven, you know? Like, and I have a different God by a different name, and we're all going to end up in this. And Christians, we find that offensive. We're like, no, because Jesus is it. And yet we don't find it as offensive when somebody goes, well, yeah, I've got this wife at home, but she's not really great to me, but my secretary. Like, it's the exact same thing. And the reason that it's problematic, the reason that Israel had a problem is because they never found, as you were saying a second ago, Micah, they never found their satisfaction in God. And because they didn't find their satisfaction in God, they sought it elsewhere. And so when we enter into an adulterous relationship, now listen, if you came and sat on my couch and this was your situation, we would walk you through it. The first thing I'm going to do is point you to the gospel. The number of men, people, the number of people who have had an adulterous relationship, have come to me for counseling, and then in the same breath, admitting their adultery, said, but I really love my wife. I'm like, well, it's not consistent. Your statement that you love your wife and your adulterous behavior are not in line with one another. Those things run counter to each other. And what someone is saying, like, I am convinced that the man who is engaged in whatever degree of adultery you want to call it, he's dating another girl or whatever degree you want to call it, a man who will depart from his wife to whatever extent for someone else, right? First of all, the Bible says he's a fool. It says it's like heaping hot coals into your lap and expecting not to get burned. But that's just from a practical standpoint. But I am convinced that man has the same problems in his relationship with Christ.
Oh, I got you.
That if he is dissatisfied with his wife and looking for someone else, I think that that's a window into his relationship with Jesus.
Absolutely, because you wouldn't be looking for satisfaction somewhere else if you actually found your satisfaction in Jesus.
Right. Because
so here's what the shift is. Like, I've seen marriage relationships where there has been, I'm struggling to find a word for that now, infidelity. There's been some extramarital relationship. I've seen marriages restored. And fantastic. And to your point a second ago, you're not showing love to your spouse when you commit adultery. But it doesn't mean that you can't be reconciled. I think that's the grace of God and the beauty of us not being under the law anymore. Is that does not taint us. You know what I mean? Like, it's an awful, terrible thing. But it doesn't change who you are in Christ, and you have the grace of God in you. So if you're at a place, like you find yourself at this place where you're in adultery, then what we would say to those people is like, stop. If you're a believer, and start living your life to represent Jesus well, reconcile with your spouse, do whatever it takes. Because here's what I think: if a husband, for example, is actually finding his satisfaction in Jesus, it doesn't really, to some degree, it doesn't really matter what the relationship is with the wife. You can start at that point and begin to love your wife as like Christ loved the church, and watch God begin to move in your relationship to change it and make it better. I'm not saying that would happen overnight or quickly, but it will begin to happen.
Could, but probably won't, because hurt.
There's emotional tension and scarring, and so. But point being, you can do that. Tell me that you believe in Jesus, that the Spirit raised him from the dead, and the same Spirit lives in you and your wife, and that Spirit can't heal scars. You know what I mean? Like, that's a stupid perspective.
Well, one of my favorite stories, probably from 10 years ago, and I'll probably tell it till the day I die, but Micah and I were doing a marriage conference at a church, and we're talking about this, that marriage is really a representation of the gospel, and it can't be. I'm not saying, Pierce, that you don't love Hannah, or Micah, that you don't love Cammie, or that I don't love Michelle. Our first aim has to be our love for Christ. As we love Christ well, our wives will be loved well. And as we're painting this for these people, as we've seen in other places, a lot of people are like, man, that's the first time I've ever thought of it that way. And so after the conference is over, this couple comes up to me and they're saying, man, like, we've never heard it like that before. There'd been a lot of resentment because I don't think you're loving me the way you should be loving me, or vice versa. And there was resentment and there was bitterness. And so the lady said, I've been engaged in an adulterous relationship, and our marriage has been in trouble, and we've just never considered it like this. And I said, wow, I'm really glad you guys are here this weekend. I said, when did your relationship with this other guy end? And she goes, well, the conference started last night. And she goes, and my husband called me at my boyfriend's house and begged me to come to the conference. So I guess it ended last night. And I was like, awesome. That was not what I was expecting at all. And then they moved forward in Christ, and they said, we're going to make this about the gospel instead of each other. And so that was a rare instance. And I'm not saying there weren't any bumps along the road, but that was a rare instance where it just was quickened in their mind, and they were able to go, okay, wait a minute. This can't be about how I feel about you. This has to be about how we feel about Jesus.
Right. I would assume the bumps are a little bit less intense if they continued the perspective that their marriage was about a representation.
Because you're on the
same
page.
For sure, yeah.
It doesn't mean the scarring's not there. It doesn't mean the hurt's not there.
No.
But you can push that stuff aside going, that's the past. That's how we used to act, but now it's different, and you can move forward.
There is grace. There is unlimited grace in God.
Absolutely. And I really think that there's a lot of people probably who, I don't know how to say this well, who dabble in infidelity. I don't know how to say that well. Like, will engage in, it's like, in my mind, it's like the teenagers who are like, well, we didn't actually have sex. Who will dabble in it in that way because their mindset is, well, I didn't actually break the law.
Right.
So here, because I know there's people who would probably ask us, like, well, how do you decide if you're in like a adulterous or whatever relationship? Like, how do you tell? And I think it's really, in my mind, it's a heart issue. Obviously, there's some 100%. Physical thing. Like, if you're like, well, I really do love my wife, but I'm, sticking it to this other girl. Like, I'm trying to make it as vulgar as I possibly can. But I really do love my wife. If you're saying it's a heart issue, Mike, and my heart's set for my, I would be like, you're an idiot.
Yeah,
like,
you don't love your wife.
No. So, but what I'm saying is, like, I think there are people who view it from a law perspective, and so they're like, well, I'm just eating lunch with this person every week, and we just text all the time and talk all the time. Here's the funny thing. I don't think those things are innately wrong. I think they're probably very unwise.
Yeah.
And so, like, I wouldn't go to someone and say, oh, you have 3 text messages from this person that's a coworker. You're in an adulterous relationship. No. What I would say is like you have to, what I'm saying with the heart, you have to gauge your heart. Are you actually finding like intimacy with that person in a way that you feel
trying
like
to get your needs met in some way or whatever?
If that's the case, I would say
that's
stop.
Problematic.
Stop. So I just don't like this idea of creating these like boundary lines of like what is adultery and what is not. I don't know. Were you planning on talking about the stuff at the village at some point this month or not?
No, I mean, we can for sure.
So anyways, my thought is
I don't have it on my culture corner if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, the Matt Chandler stuff. Like, I don't know the details of what happened. The elders basically asked him to step down for a while because he had these DMs with this woman over alcohol or something.
Yeah, so there was a guy on TikTok that came out, and he had said that Preston Sprinkle had said, and Preston Sprinkle also has a podcast. I don't know if this is on his podcast or on
the investigation, and the elders and everybody said there was no inappropriate relationship. There was no, it was just.
They just didn't like it. And again, it's, I don't know the details. It's their decision as a body. What I think I struggle with is, let's just say hypothetically that's all true. There was nothing inappropriate.
Yeah.
They're just uncomfortable with it. That's a weird standard to me.
That is
to say like, hey, you step down.
Well,
my guess is
how long have you known Katie?
Long time.
Third grade, fourth grade?
When we were 12, 20 years.
Yeah. So you guys have been friends for 20 years.
Yeah.
It would be really weird to say you can't be friends with Katie anymore.
Yeah.
But we did say when you were dating Hannah, there's
a wise way to handle that friendship.
We did tell you can't take trips with Katie by yourself anymore. Or not can't, but like that would be a dumb
be unwise.
way.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not sin. It's a lack of wisdom. Yeah. And so like being able to.
That's why I think it's a hard issue. So like if you're someone who's trying to find your needs met in someone else that's not your spouse, at that point in my mind, that's the red flag of going, oh my gosh, my desires are for someone other than God.
And that, I think, Micah, to that point, like we're not even talking about looking lustfully at them. We're not even talking about thinking about having sex with them. We're not even talking about you're making arrangements for a getaway trip. We're just talking about if you recognize that you need this other person to make you feel whole or complete or whatever. The thing that your spouse is supposed to be for you. And I want to say, listen, like even if your spouse is crappy at that, Like when you entered into marriage, like the church is really crappy a lot of the times. and it's like, honestly, like, do we long for Jesus as we should? Probably not, and yet Christ still loves us. And so like, people go, but it's not porn, or but I'm not thinking about having sex with them, or but like what you're saying, Micah, if you need this person in your life for your needs to feel met, something is off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think let me specify that. I think needs being met in terms of your marriage relationship.
Yes.
Because I think you could have, there's ladies who have friendships with other ladies that their husband's never going to be able to meet
absolutely.
that need.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
We're talking about like specifically needs in terms of the intimacy you have in a marriage relationship.
And my friend Jennifer White, who rehabbed my shoulder and my ankle, like when my arm was hurting, I was like, look, my arm is hurting. I'll make an appointment with you. Just tell me. She was like, no, just come on by. I can look at it. And I needed her in that moment.
And you got home and you were like, what the crap, Michelle? Why can't you meet my need of healing my shoulder?
So don't make a new law out of what we're saying here. Try to understand the heart of what we're saying.
That's why I think it's a hard issue. It's
it has to be.
I'll say it this way. You would know.
Yeah, you would. because it would be something that I was about to say it'd be something you were embarrassed about, but not necessarily.
No. And here's my thought. If you find yourself in that place where you're like, man, crap, I'm like, I really am like trying to find
craving that.
Yeah.
Recognize this is what you said a second ago, Ryan, is that what you're actually saying is I don't actually find my satisfaction in Jesus.
Yeah.
Because if you do, what it frees you up to do, if your satisfaction and worth actually rests in Jesus, it frees you to be the spouse that your spouse needs. And I'm saying it exactly like I mean it. That in my mind, a good marriage relationship is not about trying to find your needs met with your spouse. A good marriage relationship is, as a husband, you representing or loving your wife like Christ loves the church, and as a wife, desiring your husband in the way that the church desires Jesus. If that's the goal, you're not actually that worried about what needs are met for you from your spouse.
100%. Well, and from a strictly physical perspective, in 1 Corinthians 7, when Paul says that, he says the wife's body does not belong to herself, but to her husband, and the husband's body doesn't belong to himself, but to the wife. I've always pointed out that it's really interesting that it does not say, husband, your wife's body belongs to you. Wife, your husband's body belongs to you. It says, wife, your body isn't your own, it's your husband. So the reason that nuance is important is it's not saying, Ryan, Michelle's your servant. It's saying, Michelle, serve your husband. It's not saying, Ryan, it's not saying, Michelle, your husband is your servant. It's saying, so there's a difference between like me belonging to my wife and me wanting to serve my wife. I'm using language and I'm making it too confusing, but my point being that the attitude isn't I go into marriage going, hey, Michelle, you belong to me, which is what Mike is saying. Like, we don't go into marriage saying, you belong to me, you need to do what I need you to do. We go into marriage saying, how do I serve you? It's John 13 where Jesus says that I'm greater than all of you and I'm here as your servant. Go and do likewise. And for whatever reason, we forget to bring that as Christian couples into our marriage. And so if you are approaching marriage from I need to get my needs met rather than I'm here to serve, then you've missed the heart of Jesus. I'll also say that, just being quite blunt, if you're looking for a relationship outside of your spouse, you are in essence an idolater, because what you're saying is that God's not enough. I need something else, because this is a picture of the gospel. And you're like the Assyrians who settled in the northern kingdom of Israel, and they're like, well, we'll serve all these other gods, but we'll serve Yahweh God too. Like, we'll just add them to the mix. That's not the goal here. And
oh, my bad.
Is that your phone?
Is that yours? All right, yeah. And so it's one of those things that
have to pay for that copyright now.
It's one of those things where, like, we have to think of our marriage not from the standpoint of how do we look as a couple, but we have to think of our marriage from the standpoint of how are we representing Christ? It's interesting, like, when we have the opportunity to talk to people who really actually enjoy marriage, they're not carrying a lot of baggage, or they did carry baggage, but now God's really rebuilt them. And like, when you get a chance to talk to somebody who's enjoying marriage, and you see the way they talk about their spouse, or you see the excitement and when they're excited for their spouse, I don't know, like, it's just different than the people who like kind of begrudgingly go,
just get through it.
Yeah. And the number of Christians who are like, man, marriage is it's just hard. It's just something you got to kind of get through. like, I want you to think, next time you say marriage is hard, it's just something you get through, I want you to think about what that says about the gospel. The gospel's hard. It's just something you get through. And if you can't say it about the gospel, then quit accepting it for your marriage. Because we accept stuff in our marriage, garbage in our marriage, that we would never accept in the gospel presentation.
Yeah.
Like the guy who gets up and says, hey, Jesus loves you, but sometimes he's going to piss you off and you're going to piss him off and he's not going to want to talk to you anymore. And there'll be days that Jesus won't want anything to do with you, but come to him anyway because it's really great. That's a sucky gospel
Isn't
presentation.
that what we've culturally believed for a long time?
Yeah.
Like that's probably why marriages look that way so much.
It's 100%, I think, why marriages look that way, because we've settled for...
That's how we view our relationship with God.
We've settled for a false gospel. And so because we've settled for a false gospel, it has tainted how we do marriage.
Yeah.
Because we actually believed that we're now living under the grace of God. Like grace, you've been saved through faith. That we're no longer under the law. There's no standard, that God's already pleased with us. I'll say it to husbands, those of the three of us that are husbands, like, why do we not view that as our role in the marriage?
Right.
Like, what would it look like if husbands actually loved their wives like Christ loved the church? That no matter what the church did, I mean, if you read the letters of the churches in Revelation, it's like, you're doing all these things great, but this one thing I have against you, like this is them like, you know, God saying, here's what I'm calling out against you, but it doesn't change his love for them. It doesn't change how gracious he is towards them. So I think that's what if husbands actually were like that? You know, I still feel like, my opinion is that if there's marriage struggles, I believe that it begins best with the husband beginning to be the one who says, I love you. I think it has to be mutual, but what I'm saying is, like, I think it could be the other way around, but I think that if in that picture, in Ephesians 5, if we're following that pattern, then that it works best that way.
I agree. Yeah. 1 John 4, right? We love him because he loved us first. Yeah. And so since we as husbands represent Christ, that falls on us.
And I'm not going to make it like a 1-1 correlation with us and Jesus across the board, but the point being it's a representation. So I want to throw a little anomaly into this thought. I think that it's possible for a husband and wife as believers to have an incredible marriage relationship, and then one of them get in an awkward situation where they didn't even intend to be, like, connecting with someone on an emotional level, and then it happens. Yeah. And I think most of the time that I know of those things happening, it happens because they were in what I would call an unwise situation. So for example, traveling on the road, I'm incredibly conscious that I'm not ever in positions where those kind of connections could be made. And with my personality, it would be less likely that it would be me up front, because I'm not thinking like I'm trying to pursue some lady, but like, I don't ever want to be in a position where, like, I'm providing an opportunity for someone to, like, emotionally connect with me in that way. So that's what I mean by unwise. Like, someone who's not even trying to, like, find an extramarital relationship, you can put yourself in unwise positions where you can, whether you know it or not, begin to connect with someone in that way. So that's why I think that's why I say heart, because I think you would recognize that.
Yeah. And you use the word anomaly, which I think is a great word, because I don't think that's the norm.
No.
I think normally somebody who's not looking for it, but suddenly kind of like stumbles up on it, probably indicates that something was off in the foundation.
Yeah. Or I think,
but there are
the anomaly. I think what I'm thinking of is, like, what I mentioned earlier, that there are to use this phrase, I don't particularly like it, but, like, needs to be met. We find some of our needs met, for lack of a better phrase, in other relationships besides our spouses. Like, guys will go do stuff with each other, play poker with each other, do these things, and you could argue that that's like a guy on guy relationship with doing those things, hunting, that kind of stuff is a, if you will, need to be met. So that's what I mean is, like, you might be in one of those environments, not thinking, and one of your, to use lack of a better word, your needs are being met by this person of the other sex that you happen to connect with, and that turns into something. That's what I'm saying is, like, it's not even that you were needing it or looking for it. It just,
to that point, a lot of the pastors I know who have had affairs with women they were counseling. Yeah. Because the women are looking for rescue, help, someone stable in their life, and the pastors frequently are looking to be appreciated and valued for what they're offering. And now suddenly you have this scenario where not that pastors shouldn't counsel women, you know, but, like,
you just got to be
wise.
Don't be stupid.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You will know.
You will.
I guarantee every pastor that is in those situations knows.
Yeah.
Like you sense it.
Yeah.
You feel it.
If you end the counseling session and you after she leaves, you start looking forward to next week's counseling session, something's off, you know, like,
or just recognize that something just happened and change it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is like, I don't want people to think, well, I should never have any desire to have any other kind of relationship with anybody outside of my marriage. What we're saying is the marriage relationship has this very specific purpose, and that's to represent the relationship between Jesus and the church. It's a gospel-centered relationship. So make that the goal, and then be wise outside of that relationship and interacting with people, knowing that you will probably know when something's off.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that like if the temptation, I think, is to add another rule, like, okay, so I need to do this to check this, or I need to do this to check this. And if you really will,
if you really will,
if you really will consider the gospel, let your life be ruled by the gospel. Oh my goodness. Hey, again, seriously?
Whoa.
Every time.
If you'll let your life be ruled by the gospel, you'll find that the law isn't necessary because you're going, okay, this, like, put the scenario in a gospel presentation kind of situation and go, would this make sense as the gospel of Jesus Christ? And if it doesn't, walk away. Be done. You know, pornography does not make sense in the gospel of Jesus Christ.
No, it's an Ezekiel 16 similar situation. Although actually, it's probably better the
23,
where they're drawing pictures. of
chapter 23,
which is such a weird passage because
literally drawing pictures of the genitalia of the Assyrians on the walls.
Strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like,
because they lusted after.
So you know, it's so funny. For some reason, every time
you didn't see the Assyrians when they came through here? Come on, let me draw a picture here for you.
So every time I think about that or listen to it, or read it, for whatever reason,
you listen to that chapter every week, don't you?
Every week. That in Leviticus 18, just to remind me every week. But like, for some reason, I always think about it in terms of like, I don't actually see the pictures, thank God, but like, it's in my mind, it's like chalk drawings like kids would do.
Yeah.
My guess is it's more like an artist.
Like an engraving
artist rendering. But like in my mind, it's like
okay.
Why is it?
Yeah. You say that like chalk drawings, but like an artist is better. Have you seen some of the memes of like, I asked the artist to draw me a horse. Like, have you ever seen a horse in your life? Or like, it's these really horrendously bad. There's a meme going around right now of like a airplane like emergency landing kind of procedures. And there's a dad sitting next to a little girl, and then there's a little baby, and the baby has the exact same size, shape, and face shape as the dad. And it's like, have you ever seen creepy. A baby before? Like,
that's creepy. So, anyway. But that's pornography is probably more like that, where people are like creating images for a sexual desire of these people.
And to bring that to the gospel, people who engage in pornography are not actually interested in what the image or what they can do for the person on the screen.
Right.
Or they can do
for the other way around.
Yeah.
They're only concerned in how this image meets my needs. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just say, if you're addicted to pornography, my guess is you probably have the same view of God. I'm not interested in what I can do for you. I'm only interested in a God who will do things for me.
And can I just say, if you're addicted to pornography, you should start just looking at chalk drawings. It'll I'm joking.
Just slowly lower that's how you wean off. You slowly lower the quality until you're like, this is stupid.
No, because then what would happen is you would have trained yourself, and you're looking at a Jackson Pollock.
That's true. And you're like,
being turned on.
You can't go to MoMA at all.
Because you've just trained yourself to find the pleasure.
But yeah, it's a good point. It is still you trying to find your satisfaction in something else.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. I think that sometimes we actually don't believe that God can give us that satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's similar to, like, there was one time in my life I got off of Dr. Pepper.
You had headaches for days?
Well, I did, and it was like I felt like I couldn't think about anything but Dr. Pepper. I worked at this bank in a convenience store, and I'd stand in the front of the convenience store to hand out like flyers to people, and all I would stare at it the whole time was the fountain. And it was like I really felt like the Dr. Pepper was just looking at me and just like calling to me. And it literally wasn't until I decided I was going to start drinking Blue Powerade, which still has a lot of sugar, but it was the tapering. I was playing soccer at the time, trying to get in better shape, so this was moving in the right direction. But it wasn't until I started drinking Blue Powerade that I stopped thinking as much about Dr. Pepper. I think a lot of people who are like trying to get off of pornography will quit and say, like, God, how am I satisfied with you, without the actual pursuing of God for satisfaction?
Yeah.
And you think somehow in that little gap, kind of like I was just trying not to drink Dr. Pepper, that why is God not being my satisfaction?
Yeah.
And instead of saying you've been getting, which we said a few podcasts ago, you've been given everything you need for life and godliness through the knowledge of Him. So like, pursue God and watch how He begins to change your desires.
Yeah.
Watch Him begin to satisfy you.
That, Micah, is super key. I do think you're right. I think a lot of people spend so much time in trying to figure out how to distance themselves from their sin.
Yeah.
Distance from sin does not mean proximity to God.
Yep.
But if you move towards God, the inevitable result is a departure from sin.
Yep.
That is the result of moving closer to God.
And it doesn't mean, I'm not even saying like it goes away quickly or overnight. I'm saying that all the time. I'm just saying, like, watch God begin to change your life. Watch Him begin to change your heart.
100%.
Yeah.
Love it.
I would be curious to know from people like what we should call it now instead of adultery, or if that's totally off. I'd be interested to know if that's like the stupidest thing ever, or if it's legit.
Yeah. I'm interested as well.
Whatever everybody's thoughts are.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts. I really like episodes like this because I know the way like our minds work. This is a much simpler view of adultery. But most people who are contemplating this truth, or even, I'll just say this way, the question most of the time in culture is how far is too far. That's usually the question. So what people want is this is the standard,
right?
Instead of the gospel being the standard, instead of understanding the intention of these relationships.
What we would say is like anything but missionary style in a marriage relationship is not okay.
It's not okay.
Joking.
Yes. So what's funny though, I think that as you grow closer to God, grow closer and or grow more knowledge of God, this viewpoint is just so much simpler because you're not trying to tack on 1,000 rules, like you're not trying to play out every single situation and trying to figure out how a certain standard can play into that situation. The standard that plays into the situation, to any situation in life, is the gospel. And what's beautiful about this is that God has shown His intention for marriage, His intention for these relationships. And the viewpoint has to be there for that standard. Like it can't be, which goes back to what we said earlier about the mega pastors and stuff like that, is we tend to view these people in authority or view these people in the spotlight, what they've done is a greater offense than Joe Schmo, who happens to have cheated on his wife. But in both situations, the offense is against the gospel. And so it's just as weighty in both these situations. You're going to have a lot more news time and airtime on one situation than the other, but the offense shouldn't be their career. The offense should be rooted in their career. The offense should be rooted in the gospel.
Right.
And so,
one last thought. I think we also as believers need to have the perspective of grace.
Absolutely.
Yes. I think there's a difference between a dude. I'll say a dude because it's usually a dude. A person who's like consistently engaging in infidelity and is like, screw you, I'm going to continue to do this no matter what. That's a different. I mean, Paul says kick those people out, basically.
Yeah.
Get rid of expel the immoral brother. But what I mean is like Steve Fee, for example, he's worship leader, used to be, I think he's still worship leader in Atlanta, maybe. Came out, he was in an adulterous relationship years ago. He was like probably one of the most famous worship leaders at the time. And instead of people just writing him off, his church, he wasn't able to lead in his position, and he stepped down. And the church literally like wrapped their arms around him and said, we're going to walk with you through this. And they did. Yeah. And then today, as far as I understand, he came back and is leading worship again. That's the perspective we've got to have is the grace of God covers us. I'm not saying adultery is okay. What I'm saying is we deal with it, but remembering that those people, if they've put faith in Jesus, are still children of God, declared righteous in the sight of God, no matter what they've done. And we have to have that perspective. And we need to love them enough to tell them you're an idiot.
Yeah.
And I might kick you in the nuts because of what you've done, just to remind you. I'm just kidding. But maybe it depends on the person.
Maybe you're kidding.
Maybe. But then we put our arms around them and we remind them of who they are in Christ, and don't let this thing keep them from living a life that proclaims the gospel. So that's what I mean. Like in the midst of the infidelity and the sin, we walk with people through that graciously so that they can come back to a place where they're living by the gospel.
Absolutely.
Which,
to what I was saying a second ago as well, like that, like bleeds consistency, or the consistency of the gospel should bleed across the entire situation. So it's not like we get offended because of the gospel and then we react out of an anger that doesn't now reflect the gospel, or a better way of saying that we therefore put in action things that don't reflect the gospel. Like the offense is rooted in the gospel, and then in the midst of that, we then respond with our actions rooted in the gospel. Right. And so we respond out of grace. We acknowledge the love of God. We also acknowledge the power of restoration that Christ brings. And so, again, there are situations where you may be expelling somebody, may be a lot more intense, but there's also plenty of situations.
That's the anomaly. Yeah. That's not the norm.
Exactly. There's a lot of situations where people need to be gathered around and they need to be shown grace. They need to be pointed out the intensity and the offense.
And I also think too,
and then moving forward from that.
There's a lot of people who probably would never admit it, but have some kind of engagement in a relationship that is extramarital, even if they haven't, in their terms, broken the line yet, gone too far.
Yeah.
And what I hope those people hear is that you're under the grace of God. Like, you're not tainted by the sin you're engaging in. So stop and change your perspective and try to find your satisfaction in God. Stop trying to find your satisfaction in those things. Like, don't spend the rest of this year, the next few years, feeling so discouraged by how you've been acting that you don't actually live a life for the glory of God. Like, get on your face today and just cry out to God and say, God, this is terrible, and I've been an awful representation of you, and I haven't loved you in response to your love for, just spend some time in prayer confessing, and then get up off your knees and go.
Go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't dwell in guilt and condemnation that's created by you, because you are now you're
that's
no longer
a lie
condemned.
of the enemy.
Exactly. Yeah.
People that are believers living in guilt. You are believing a lie because Jesus Christ has done what it was necessary to remove that guilt from you. And you were basically saying, Jesus, it wasn't enough.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
So stop,
guys.
Oh yeah. Stop.
There we go.
Sorry.
Everybody. Stop. Yeah. Dope. You guys don't have anything to add to our talk on adultery? A simpler view. God has an intent for marriage, and that intent, the core intent of that is representation of the gospel. You think that's the first time. Dope. Sweet. Wow. On cloud 9 now. I didn't have to clarify any more language.
Sweet wow, cloud 9.
Dope, sweet wow, cloud 9. Speaking of all those positive feelings, we're at the Garden Audio with Steven. Anytime I'm in the presence of Steven, it's dope, sweet cloud 9, baby. It's a good time.
It smells like vanilla.
And it smells like vanilla, being around Vanilla Man. If you want to get a little bit of that essence, the essence of Steven, as it were, go follow him on social media. Go see what he's got going on over there. Shoot him a message, say hello. Engage in conversations. Great to use social media socially. And while you're over there, we are at Simpler Pod through on Facebook and Instagram. Go see what we got going on. We post clips, we post memes, but also that is a great place to get a hold of us. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have topic recommendations, let us know. We want to know what you guys are learning about, and if you guys want us to join in on a conversation that you guys may be having elsewhere. So like to hear our thoughts on maybe some stuff that you're learning or going through and stuff like that. We'd love to talk about it. It's a great time.
Is the essence of Steven like that movie with Pee Wee Herman where he's a wannabe superhero?
I haven't seen that
You
one.
know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember.
It's like all these people that are like,
oh yes,
Mystery Men?
Mystery Men.
Dude, how good is Mystery Men?
Is the essence of Steven like Pee Wee Herman in that one? Or here he's like,
yes. We need to do Steven to do that so bad.
Can you put Steven's face over Pee Wee Herman's face in that movie?
Well, now I have to, man. I gotta edit. I gotta get a clip of him doing that and then edit his face into it.
Mystery Man.
What a good movie.
So
we watched that at camp one year. It's a good time.
So much fun.
Yeah, good times as always. And as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll catch you guys next week. Bye.
Adios.